you think you are? Our Colleen Marshall now knows she is not who she thought she was.
In fact, all this month, with the help of Ancestry.com, Colleen has been exploring her family history. Last week, we learned the tragic story of a mining explosion that claimed the life of one of your great-grandfathers at that time.
And now it is time to take that story to your family.
You know, I wondered if it was possible if I was the only one in the family who didn't know this story about my great-grandfather, James McCune. I never knew he existed, did they? After I heard his story, it was time to share it. James McCune was an Irish coal miner who came to these rolling hills of Pennsylvania in 1886 looking for a new life, only to die in a deadly mine explosion 4 years later, leaving behind his wife Bridget, daughter Catherine, and baby Mary, my grandmother. Hours after learning this tragic tale, I went to the top of one of the Dunbar Mountains to my brother's log home to share James McCune's story with my family. My brother John, sister Maureen, her son Don and his wife Sarah, and my Uncle Jack and Aunt Edna gathered to hear the secret story. Uncle Jack Cooper is my mother's youngest brother, the family historian with deep Dunbar roots. So what did we all think this Dunbar story would be about?
It was about the Coopers.
The Coopers, because the Coopers are the Dunbar side of the family, right?
Correct.
Okay, so that's why I said Uncle Jack has to be here, because it's in Dunbar, it has to be the Coopers. Well, it's not about the Coopers.
Oh my gosh.
It's not? The
No.
Lemons?
No.
Not the Connors.
The Connors. It's our grandmother's story, really. What was Grandma's maiden name?
Bainbridge.
Okay, so what do you know about Bainbridges?
They were from England.
That was the story we all knew, but it was never true. I started with the 1900 bar census. Here's Bridget, their daughter Sarah, remember Aunt Sarah Ellen?
Yeah.
And they had a brother, Robert. But then, when you get to the other two children that are in the house, they have a different last name. It's McCune.
Get out.
Grandma was never a Bainbridge. He's her stepfather.
Bainbridge is her stepfather?
Bainbridge is her stepfather. The marriage certificate of Robert and Bridget Bainbridge gives the first real clue about James McCune. He died on June 16th of 1890. And Robert Bainbridge had a first wife who also died. In 1890, on June 16th, one of the worst mine disasters ever in Dunbar happened. The Hill explosion. The Hill Farm explosion. That's exactly it.
I know exactly where it's at.
And they said it was still burning when you were a kid. You could still see smoke there. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Our great-grandfather died that day. I showed them the newspaper accounts and the mine inspection report about the bodies pulled out 2 years later. Uncle Jack fills in another grim detail.
Grandpap helped bring the dead out.
Did he really?
Yep.
My great-grandfather on my mother's side helped carry out the body of my great-grandfather on my father's side.
Grandpap Cooper was born in 1859.
Okay.
So he is grown.
And he helped pull the bodies out?
Yep. Yeah.
How is it possible that none of us ever heard this story? All of Dad's brothers and sisters died, and I don't think any of them ever knew this.
No, if they did,
no one told us.
Our cousins have since confirmed that none of my aunts or uncles knew. They grew up with both grandfathers living in their house, one English, one Irish, and that was sometimes the source of friction. They never knew that in reality, they were 100% Irish. And my father never knew his family had started life in America in Dunbar. You know how Dad used to make fun of Mom for being a Dunbar mule? His family was from Dunbar. His roots were in Dunbar, and he never knew this.
He's spinning right now.
He's like, what? I'm from Dunbar?
But yeah. Don't you wish Mom could be here?
Don't you think that's crazy?
Yeah.
It really is.
My family now knows the long-forgotten story of James McCune. Less than a year ago, the Dunbar Historical Society erected a memorial to the 31 men who died together deep inside the Hill Farm mine.
We had people here last year when we dedicated this And we tried to find people that had a background to this story, and here it was you, and we didn't know it. We'd have contacted you and got you here.
Neither did I know it.
Yeah, I know. I know.
None of us knew it. This story sent my sister on a mission. With the help of our cousin Karen's childhood memory, Maureen found a tombstone on its back, hidden between these trees. It's the final resting place of my great-grandmother Bridget and Robert Bainbridge, the man who raised my grandmother as if she were his own. By all accounts, they had a close and loving relationship. Did my grandmother know he was not her father? Did Robert keep the secret as he and Bridget built their new family life together? Was the tragic story simply too much for my great-grandmother Bridget to bear?
It's I'll be here in sunshine or in shadow.
Whatever the reason, the memory of James McCune was buried as deep as the mine where he lost his life, forgotten beneath the earth, with no one left to mourn his life or remember his name. Until now.
You've had the opportunity, even though he may have been forgotten for a couple generations, you now know about him and you can pass that along because he mattered. His life mattered. I mean, what he sacrificed really for his family, for a better life for his family, he ended up sacrificing his life. And that's worth remembering.
If somebody goes up past that way now, and is there because of the work we did here and the story behind it, if they say one prayer as they go into that area, then it was worthwhile doing this for those men that never got back out.
And while we found the resting place, the final resting place of my great-grandmother and the man we always believed to be our great-grandfather, no one knows where my real great-grandfather, James McCune, and most of the other miners who died with him were buried. It's believed because most of these men were immigrants and left behind children and widows with no working papers. By the time those 29 bodies were located 2 years after the explosion, their families could not afford funerals or headstones, and that the men might have been buried together in a single mass grave. So far, though, if that happened, no one has found it.
Very fascinating. And isn't it interesting, the revelations that you come to with your family and sitting there even with your, that was
uncle? My mom's youngest brother.
Right.
Yes.
Even he,
yes.
He was surprised.
Yeah, he knew none of this, although he remembered that mine burning.
But how far away was that from your home?
Less than a mile.
Less than a mile?
Less than a mile. I could have walked to it easily.
Never heard the story.
Never heard it.
Thanks,
Well,
Colleen.
now we feel a little closer to you than ever before.
Yeah, could you get any closer, really, after all these years?
I think you've shared about.
Are there any Irish stories you haven't heard in my family?
There was one you didn't share with the audience about when you would have celebrations when it was time to leave, but we won't get into that.
We won't get into that.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Gab, for bringing that up.
Wouldn't you love to see if there are any big secrets in your family history? We're giving away 4 World Explorer annual memberships to Ancestry.com. You have until 11:59 tonight to register. Go to NBC4i.com and search Ancestry, and we'll announce the winners tomorrow.
We have Jim in now.